I'd like to start today just by giving you a very short list of historical names. And these names are probably ones you might have heard before. These names are George Herman Jr., William Frederick Cody, Matuaka, Henry McCarty, and Eva Maria. Do any of these names ring any bells? Maybe, some of them. Not much, but I can assure you that all of you know these people because they're very famous. You just don't know them by their original names. You know them by their more popular, well-known names. So these people that I mentioned are Babe Ruth, Buffalo Bill, Pocahontas, Billy the Kid, and Evita. These well-known names, although they're not their own names, but these names that they've been given are forever stuck in history. Once it's stuck, that's it, they couldn't change it. And people forever now will always know these people by their fake names. But the point is that we know these people by these names. And some of these names don't even have a good meaning. Like Billy the Kid obviously is a bad name because he's a bad guy. But Pocahontas, you wouldn't think that's a bad name, right? When you think of Pocahontas, you think of a sweet Native American woman, popularized by the movies. But she actually had many other names. Pocahontas itself actually does not have a very good meaning. But it's forever stuck, and we'll always think of the positive side from that name. So that's just proof that nicknames for famous people, but for everybody, work the same way. Once it sticks, there's nothing you can do to change it. However, they are useful because by those names we get to know and see the person's qualities. They all come to mind from these names, despite the origin and the meaning of some of those names. And that's something we definitely see in our reading for today with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Many people grow up thinking that these are their original names, but they're not. These are not their original names. But once they were given these names, they stuck. There was nothing they could do to change it. And part of the reason because of that is because they were in the culture back then and they were given those names, but also because the word itself uses those names quite often and emphasizes them a lot. So that brings us to our reading for today, which continues in our story this morning that we left off with the kids. Daniel chapter 3. We see Nebuchadnezzar building this golden statue or image, which everybody had to bow down to whenever the music played. And if they don't, they'll be thrown into the fire. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not bow down. So now we get to see what exactly happened as a result of that. So this is picking up verse 15, chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar is interrogating Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He says, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you did not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Look," he answered, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose body the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies. And they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Quite an amazing story indeed, full of really interesting details too. The main thing we see is Nebuchadnezzar, what he represents, and what he imposed on everybody. And then we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what they stand for and what they stood up to. Now the theme in this reading is the same as the previous chapters in Daniel. We see commitment and faith in the Lord over the love of self and the pride of self. But to be more specific, today's reading really is more a matter of confidence in the Lord, security in the Lord, hope in the Lord, no matter how strong the opposition is. The opposition in this reading is in the form of King Nebuchadnezzar and his golden image and the law that he set forth, requiring everybody to bow down or burn. Now, if we keep the context, the first 2 chapters are about identifying the different sides of us: love of the Lord, love of self. And the second chapter is a matter of staying to that one side, praying to the Lord. In the 3rd chapter now, we see how the love of self tries to turn out the heat, literally. So now our faith in the Lord is tested. Interesting details in this story. Interesting that in this chapter we see Nebuchadnezzar build a huge giant statue made out of gold that everybody had to bow down to or burn whenever the music played. Now it's interesting not just because he built a statue, but because he built the statue right after chapter 2, which is when he had a dream about a big statue. And in this dream, the statue is made up of different parts of metal, which we read about, the head of gold, silver, bronze, and so on. And that dream, Daniel had told him that he, Nebuchadnezzar, made up the head of gold. Now, the statue in chapter 2, at least, can have a good representation, because it stands for the different churches on the earth in the past time. As to their internal qualities, it can say a lot of good things about us as well. So that statue in chapter 2 has integrity, even though it was destroyed by the rock. Now, it seemed like Nebuchadnezzar liked the idea of him being the head of gold in that statue. So now he sets out in chapter 3 to amplify that, to exaggerate that, building his own statue, just like the one he dreamed about. But he doesn't want to be just a head of gold. He wants the whole thing gold. He wants to be all perfect, made out of gold. Now, the literal sense is very clear. This is Nebuchadnezzar's statue. This is the statue that Nebuchadnezzar made. Everybody had to bow down to the statue that Nebuchadnezzar made. Nebuchadnezzar made the statue. His name is always attached to the statue, this image. Meaning there is nothing whatsoever of God in this statue. So clearly this image is a reflection of himself. As it is gold, he wants to be all perfect. It's the love of self fluffing up and saying, this is the best thing. This is what it's all about. This is it. Self-assertiveness. And this is what Nebuchadnezzar represents, the love of self, especially when he gets puffed up and raged. So you can see the difference between this statue and the one in chapter 2. This one here in chapter 3 is the exact opposite of the one in his dream. There is no integrity whatsoever in the statue. It is all perverted. This is a form of arrogance, the love of self. And to bow down to it would be to pay homage to self, to put self as the highest, best, most important thing. And the love of self has many forms. It doesn't always have the form of love me, praise me. The love of self can also be when we act on our fears instead of acting on faith in the Lord, because we're concerned about ourselves. But this is what the three men were up against. That's what we're up against. We're up against Nebuchadnezzar, his golden image, which is a giant, arrogant sense of perfection, which is nothing better. There's nothing better than self. This is the source of pressure for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Anytime the music played, everyone had to stop whatever it is they were doing and bow down. Or burn. Like love of self is saying, love me, look at me, take care of me, or else. Now it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar, his love of self, is doing everything he can to get all the attention. He builds this great golden image. He's forcing everybody to bow down to it. Love me, look at me, and there'll be harsh consequences if you don't. Yet despite his efforts to get all the attention, notice that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got all the attention in this story. It was all on them. They got the spotlight. These three are the only ones mentioned out of all the Jews. Not even Daniel was present in this story. Not even mentioned. Daniel was not in the story. Chapter 2, though, did indicate that Daniel was set as the head of the gate of the city. Whereas these three men are in the city. But it's useful to see this, that Daniel's not here, because as Daniel represents or stands for that commitment and loyalty to the Lord, we can see that that commitment doesn't have to fall onto one single person. We see it also reflected in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now notice how these three names are mentioned in this chapter at least 12 times. 12 times only in this chapter we hear these names, and never once do we hear their original names, which again are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We only hear their Babylonian names, the ones they were given. And we'll try to think about a reason for that a little later. But what we see is that they displayed commitment to the Lord by not bowing down to Nebuchadnezzar's golden image or his idol. And they were fully aware of the consequences. They knew what would happen. But it was like they were more aware, more confident in the Lord, and that he would protect them. And he did. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's response to them not bowing down, he gets all puffed up, he's enraged. It's sort of like the pride and arrogance, the selfness, saying there's nothing better than me, how dare you. So he turns up the heat even more, 7 times. So much so that the guards who bound up the three men were burned instantly. And so this is like the love of self trying to put on a show of force, trying to win the argument, just trying to be right. But to Nebuchadnezzar's surprise, the three of them are just walking around in this furnace unharmed. Apparently with a fourth man in there as well, who obviously was an angel there to protect them. He was so impressed that when he took them out, he saw that there was no harm done to these guys whatsoever. Their clothes were fully intact, their hairs were all intact, there was no burn at all on them, there was not even any smell of smoke on these guys. So he was so amazed that he acknowledged the Lord's power. He could say that truly this is your God. This is the God of heaven and earth. All powerful. He could acknowledge God's power. And interesting that he could acknowledge his power. Nebuchadnezzar, the evil king, could acknowledge the Lord's power, though he did not convert and start worshiping the Lord. And he would never do that. Nebuchadnezzar, he would never do that. The reason why is because as he represents the love of self. The love of self will never convert and become love of the Lord. The love of self will always be the love of self. It can be governed by the love of the Lord. It can be put in proper place. And it's a good thing when it's put in place, because from that self, that sense of self, we get a sense of ownership throughout our regeneration. Owning the things of the Lord that he gives to us. But what is evident is that God's power was made known, and the three men counted on it, and they knew it, and so they didn't deviate from their commitment to him. We can learn a lot from their loyalty and their commitment here. Good lessons here on sticking to your guns. And that's what our sermon title is today, Sticking to Your Guns. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stuck to their guns. And they even told that to the king, saying, we will not serve your gods, nor we will worship the gold image which you have set up. No way we're going to go there. They set their boundary, and that was it. They weren't going to deviate from that at all. Stuck to their guns. Now, sticking to your guns is a useful expression that a lot of people use these days. It just means to stand up to what you believe in, no matter how much people tell you that you're wrong. It's just important to make sure that what you believe in is correct. So we deal with that. We try to go about seeing that we believe in the correct things, and there's also a bit of fear associated with that because we don't want to offend anybody, right? So we don't often stand up to what we believe in because we don't want to offend other people, so oftentimes we might even go along with what they believe. Put aside our own beliefs. But that's not really healthy. It's important to own your beliefs. To own your beliefs. To not put aside your beliefs for any reason. And you own your beliefs by just standing up to them. That could be as simple as saying no, without being afraid of what other people will say or how they will react. Now, of course, there are many different ways we can do this. It's very strategic or mechanical, if you will. It's just a matter of going according to your conscience, living according to your conscience, while regarding the neighbor at the same time. But the most important thing is that we learn how to do this internally. That matters more. If what you believe in is from the Lord, then it's a matter of faith. And sticking to your guns in this case would be a matter of sticking to your sword. Because a sword is a better image of the truth. More specifically, a sword is an image or a symbol of the truth of your faith. This is a truth that you understand, that you have a firm handle on, and that you let it govern and direct your life in all matters. And if this is the truth that you are sticking to and believe in, then this will hold you. It will keep you steadfast in your trials and your temptations. The good news, though, is that the more we go through trials and temptations, the stronger our faith becomes. We become more confirmed in goodness and truth, and that is what our story today really is all about. I'd like to read a little bit more about this now, since it's so fundamental. This idea of confirming, strengthening our faith by means of temptations. So whenever you hear the word temptations in this reading, you can interchange it with trials and tests. This is from number 194 of the New Jerusalem and its Heavenly Doctrine. It says, temptations are of use in acquiring dominion for good over evil, and for truth over falsity. Also in confirming truths and conjoining them with goods, and at the same time in dispersing evils and the falsities therefrom. Temptations are also of use in the opening of the internal spiritual man, and in subjugating the natural man to it, and at the same time in breaking the loves of self and the loves of the world, and in restraining the lusts which are therefrom. After these things have been brought about, man obtains enlightenment and a perception of what truth and good and falsity and evil are. From this, a man obtains intelligence and wisdom, which afterward increase from day to day. So faith really does get stronger through our trials and our temptations when it is tested. Just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were stronger after the fiery furnace. They were untouched, they were not burned, and instead of being consumed by the fire, they were promoted, made stronger. And that's because they were loyal to the Lord no matter what. And we're loyal to the Lord when we stick to the truth of our faith, no matter what. So now, before we finish, I'd like to just say a few things about names, since we started with that today, and what these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, really stood up to. We see how they lived up to their real character, their true quality, which is what names in the Word are all about. Qualities, characteristics. They did not live up to their Babylonian names. Their Babylonian names are associated with foreign gods and idols of different kinds. So perhaps the reason why these names are mentioned so often in this reading is to make it more obvious that they were preserved because of their devotion to the Lord and not from their Babylonian names. Their devotion to God was really strong, which allowed the Lord to be really powerful in this image, this story, even so that Nebuchadnezzar could see it. They would not bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's image. They would not succumb to their Babylonian names. It's just like us not bowing down to ourselves and the pride of self or self-intelligence. It's part of us, just like the names are part of us. But what we see here instead in this story is the Lord's superior, powerful presence in a place where Babylon and the love of self is all you see. You're in the midst of it. It's even in your name. Yet the Lord can be that much more powerful. Now, as the doctrines say, faith in the Lord protects us against the things of evil, and it subdues the love of self. It puts it in the proper place by means of temptations. And that especially when we stand up to what we believe in. And this happens in us internally, spiritually. On the surface, however, it might look like something like confidence in the Lord over pride and arrogance, things that we can easily identify in ourselves. But if we are confident about the qualities in us that are from the Lord, these will keep us steadfast against the forms of arrogance and the allurements of the love of self. Now next week, we'll look into chapter 4 of Daniel. Something bad happens, but this produces a useful lesson on humility. Amen. For now, let us pray.